I'm Moynihan. I've been riding, racing and making bike videos for over 10 years and it's what I spend most of my time doing. It can be really tricky to improve at riding your bike, both descending and climbing, but there's a few little tips and tricks that I've got which might help you along the way, which are maybe a little bit different from the usual ones you might hear. So number one, if you're out riding at your local bike park or even just your local woods and there are faster riders there, maybe even there's a pro rider like Laurie Greenland for example, if you can watch them really closely and see what they're actually doing, not just watch them and be in awe, but actually see what they're doing with their body, how they're turning, how they're leaning, where their body position is on the bike. If you can then transfer that back to your own riding, to me that is the best possible way you can learn. Along those same lines, if you really want to take your riding to the next level, there are a lot of ex-pros who are now coaches and the experience and input that they can give into your riding can be completely invaluable in helping you to improve. Tip number two is a little bit of off-the-bike advice. If you can get fitter and stronger, that'll really help and translate back to on-the-bike performance. Your first port of call for guidance on training and becoming fitter and stronger will probably be online. So if you're doing that, just make sure that you check the credentials of the people who are giving you the advice and the videos you're watching, and don't just follow anything because it could be terrible advice in the gym which is only going to injure you rather than make you stronger. If you're really lost and you don't know what you're doing but you really want to improve with your fitness and strength, there's plenty of specific mountain bike coaches who are really good at what they do and they can give you great advice online. If you're on a real budget and you don't have time to do the research on what to do to improve your fitness and strength, you can just start with basic intervals, 30 seconds of effort followed by 30 seconds of rest, and just repeat that for a certain number of times. And all you need is a little hill to do it on. Those improvements that you'll make in your fitness and strength, you'll notice will really translate back to the trail, and when you're out on a group ride, you'll probably be catching your faster friends and maybe pulling away from the ones who are normally behind you. Tip number three, it's all about the bike. I'd love to say that the bike is the number one key, but it's really not. I've seen people on absolute rafts of a machine going at a hell of a speed. So if you've not got a fancy bike, don't worry about it, you can still go fast on a bike. However, that said, checking your tyre pressures are approximately correct and making sure all your bolts are tight, there's not things hanging off, and making sure all your spokes are tight are going to make a massive difference to just the way you can ride. If you want a really good video with in-depth information about tyre pressures, you can click the link above me or the one in the description. So although your bike being in perfect order is not the be-all and end-all, if you do want to go really fast and you're at the upper end of sport and you're just getting those tiny last improvements, it is worth spending a fair amount of time when you're out riding thinking about what the bike's doing. Although for me the key is to never overthink it, so I allocate set little bits of time where I'll think about my bike, maybe a certain trail or a certain ride, and then the rest of the time I just forget about it, don't think about what the bike's doing. If you do start to overthink it with the bike, it can detract from the enjoyment you have riding, and it can also just start to mess with your head if you're racing. You're just thinking about the bike more than you are what you're doing or about just riding your bike well and fast. So tip number four is a little bit of psychology, but basically, do you actually want to go faster? You might not have fallen off your bike in years or ever, and if that's the case, then fair enough. But if you do want to really genuinely improve at descending, you're probably going to have to take some risks at some point. All the best downhill racers are going to have had big crashes at some point in their lives because they've been pushing the limit, and that's really the only way you can find out where the limit actually is. So I don't want to encourage people to go out there and get hurt, but if you do actually want to improve at descending and get to a point where you're competitively racing, you're going to have to take some risks at some point, and deciding that within is a part of it all. The chances are most crashes actually occur not because you're pushing your limit and right on the edge of what's possible, but because of strange little accidents or lapses in concentration. So it's worth going out there, pushing your limits and seeing how you get on. You're probably more likely to become extremely focused when you're pushing your limit, so it's not necessarily going to result in an accident. Number 5 is a little bit about the classic things people talk about when you're improving your descending skills, and that is the technique. It's a very complex issue which takes years to master, and it takes a long session even with a coach to just discuss improving a simple part of technique. But for me, there are a few key parts to technique which is worth considering. Those would be line choice, keeping your eyes up, braking, and body position. There are so many aspects to line choice that it's worth taking note of some of the previous points in this video to improve your line choice, watching better riders, perhaps having a coach, or even just experimenting with your friends to see what works well and what doesn't. It's also worth noting a better line might not necessarily be faster if you can't ride it with proper commitment, so it's a multifaceted situation which is so complicated that it just takes time and effort to learn about and put into practice. Keeping your eyes up is pretty self-explanatory, but it's also one of the things that's easiest to get wrong. It's so easy to start looking at what's straight in front of your front wheel rather than what's ahead of you, so everyone does it, but it's just something that needs practiced. On to body position, again a really complex issue which takes a really long time to get right, so again maybe a coach or watching better riders is important. But one piece of advice that I've always found helpful is being told about palm pressure, so it's important to have pressure between your palm and your grip to make sure your weight is enough on the front wheel. If you lose that pressure between your palm and your grip and you lean, that probably signifies that you've leant too far back and you probably won't have control of your front wheel anymore. So although it's a complicated issue and there's so much to it, that's one little nugget which I've always found very helpful. Braking is so situation dependent, and it's got sort of so many minutely complicated aspects of it, but one thing that I do see people often do wrong when they're beginners is going down a steep chute and locking up the back brake, which doesn't really help. You need to be able to feather both brakes. So really the only advice that I feel I can give for braking is practice, trial and effort, and coaching. So they were my top tips for improving your descending. Hopefully you found them useful, and if you've got any hot tips of your own, leave them in the comments, and like and subscribe for more.